Hi, and welcome back to Fire Talks. My name is Chris Brunette. I'm the Chief of the Fire and Life Safety Section with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. With me on this episode is Kim McDonald and Aaron Johnson. They are our WUI educators within our professional development unit. They are out there in our communities teaching not only local jurisdictions, but anybody who will listen about the new Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code. I'm so happy to have them here with me today. And with that, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So if you don't mind jumping in, Aaron, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got here and kind of what your role is.
Well, thank you, Chris. Happy to be here, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about what we do. My name's Aaron. I started off in wildland fire a little over 20 years ago. I had the opportunity when I was working for the National Park Service to get my red card and completely changed the trajectory of my life at the time. I was going to school for wildlife biology at the time, and then I went on my first deployment and absolutely fell in love with wildland fire. From there, I had the opportunity to join up with volunteer rural departments and work for larger city municipal departments as well, working through various roles before transitioning over to work for a nonprofit, the West Region Wildfire Council, doing wildfire mitigation specific work for 6 counties in Colorado. During that time, I worked with 2 counties that had adopted a wildfire code previously, and had the opportunity to really expand on the work that they were doing and see how codes could support wildfire mitigation in general. And when Colorado adopted the state code, I really wanted to have a chance to participate and see if I could bring my knowledge and background to bear and help people figure out how to make this work for them and make it make sense for the communities that they're in.
So good. Yeah. And we're so happy that you're here with us and part of the family here at the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. I know you're doing great things out there, just like Kim is. And Kim, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got here?
Not a problem, Chris. I took a little bit different route than Aaron. I worked for Summit Fire and EMS and retired from them last fall. I had worked my way up to division chief and fire marshal, but I also did wildland fire investigations, and I had my red card. And so I had this opportunity. I made it 4.5 months in retirement, and this just seemed, the educator program just seemed to fit the bill for what I wanted to do after I retired. It's such a positive thing. Aaron and I laugh about it. I'm the code geek. I think codes serve a purpose, and I like codes. So this, being able to help educate people within this program, to get them feeling comfortable with it, and just to see the look on their faces when they realize it truly isn't as bad as they think it is. It's a great code. It works well within the state of Colorado. And the code board, I think, did an exceptionally good job for their first time out. So, and we're just having fun traveling the state and educating people just to what the requirements are.
Yeah, I always knew there was something wrong with you, Kim. I mean, like me, you like codes and enjoy them. So I think we probably need to have our heads checked. But I got to tell you, when you were willing to come out of retirement and work with us, I was so excited. And having the 2 of you together out there helping our communities with, I think, over 50 years of experience between the 2 of you, it's pretty exciting. And to see what you're doing is amazing. You're really making an impact, and I can't thank you both enough. And so with that, I kind of want to dive into what it is you are doing out there. But before we do that, we probably need to introduce the professional development unit where you work and tell our listeners a little bit about it. So I don't know if one of you want to give a little bit of background or history with the start of the program. I can provide some of that history if you'd like me to, or if either of you want to.
Aaron, you want to start with that?
Well, I will fill in as much as I can, I suppose, but this is definitely going to be a group project to fill in this history. So PDU is really there as a unit to support those that are working to implement and enforce codes across the state. There's a lot of background and a lot of different ways that jurisdictions approach how they utilize codes and how they're going about the enforcement with them. And so being able to provide a professional unit that can really support how those codes are being implemented was really, really important. And so us specifically for the Wildfire Resiliency Code wanted to make sure as much information was being put out there, as much support as possible for the adoption and the implementation as we could get. Kim, I'll let you jump in with your thoughts.
No, I think the PDU is such a important role working within the division. Within our jobs, education is so important. Be able to provide that support to people, helping them work through with the knowledge that we can supply to everybody. It just makes it so much better, and be able to help people set up the jurisdictions themselves with their programs. Providing that support has worked out so well. We have great leadership that we rely on, and it just makes our job so much easier. So
yeah, and if I might, I want to frame it a little bit more and go back in the days before you both joined our team and just talk about how we started the PDU and why we started it. So this takes us back to around 2018, 2019, to let our listeners know. We certify roughly 450 fire and building inspectors throughout the state of Colorado to do work within the programs that we administer, primarily fire suppression systems, public schools, charter schools, institute charter schools, and local district colleges, as well as all licensed healthcare facilities in the state. And part of the legislation that established those programs stated that if a local jurisdiction was going to work in those types of facilities, they need to be certified by the division. So we had been doing that certification for a number of years. And what we recognized over time is that although we had these folks certified at the local level to work in these programs, there wasn't the level of consistency across the state that really we'd like to see. And so we went to the legislature and asked for the professional development unit, whose goal would be to really drive that consistency, not only in fire agencies, but also in building departments for all those folks who are doing work in these programs. So we were able to get that team in 2019. And I think since then, it has truly benefited all of our partners at the local level, not only to drive consistency in the work that we do in these programs, but just to help create that level of professionalism that we all want to see. So I don't want to take complete credit for that. There are organizations in our state that are working hand in hand with us to make sure that all of our code professionals in this state are up to date, and some of the most knowledgeable code professionals that I've ever met. I've always said that at a national level, I would put enforcement agencies in Colorado up against anybody, and I think we would hold our own, if not come out on top. I just think we have some great code professionals here in Colorado, and so it's just nice to have the professional development unit to augment that. And it's no different now with this new Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code. We recognized that we needed to get educators out to help teach about the code, help not only jurisdictions, but contractors and and constructors how to apply the code and what their role is with the code. And so we had the opportunity to get a grant, a FEMA grant, and we were awarded that grant. It gave us 3 years of resources to be able to hire Aaron and Kim and get them out into our communities. And I'll tell you what, I think when they take a look at the impact they've made with this grant, the people who awarded this grant, I think, can be pretty proud that Aaron and Kim are are really making a difference. So that's kind of the background from my point of view. But Aaron and Kim, I know there's a whole lot more detail that I left out. Maybe you can share a little bit about how the program works. You know, things like, does it cost people money to reach out to you? And then, you know, what kind of support we're offering and how that's handled. So one of you want to jump in and share a little more on that?
Take that, you know, within this aspect, under the grant, we have 3 different phases. Phase 1 was to actually get out and talk with the municipalities, Board of County Commissioners, fire protection districts, the governing bodies that have to adopt this code. And it's been really interesting getting out. You know, we have a bit of a challenge. Colorado is a home rule state, and this, as the first model code, technically has led to a lot of questions on, does a jurisdiction have to adopt, which yes, they do. But it's being able to provide that education, and it really helps them understand what the requirements of the code is, and that it's not as bad as they think it was. I think that's one of the biggest problems that we were running into, and just going out and speaking to them. Like we've covered pretty well the majority of the state. Aaron set up a program. I think we have 642 jurisdictions technically I have to adopt this code. So I don't know if we're going to be able to speak to all of them, but we've already had well over 80 meetings now around the state, and it has really helped.
Yeah, and one of the great things is our program doesn't cost anything. We have a form online where you can fill it out to give us a little bit more information about where you're at with things and the challenges that you're facing. And then we will work with you to figure out what the best support mechanism is. It could be as simple as, hey, we just need to jump on a 5-minute call because you've got a couple of questions that are relatively easy to answer, or we need to come out and we need to do a really detailed full day training where we're walking through all the aspects and trying to make sure everyone understands the content and building consensus around how it might work within a community. Kim and I, we cover the entire state. We're crisscrossing back and forth. I'm based out of Montrose. Kim is outside of Summit. And there's a good chance that if you need help, we're going to be in your area within the next couple of weeks doing something anyways. And hopefully we can build off of when we're going to be there or make ourselves available if we need to do something in person.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough to our listeners the number of miles these guys put on. If they weren't familiar with all the roads in Colorado before taking these positions, they certainly are familiar with them now, because every day I look at where they're at and they're somewhere different in Colorado. They've taken it to heart that they want to reach out to all communities in Colorado, and they're doing that. So it's amazing to see the work you guys are doing and how you're getting out into the communities. But it really is, I think you hit the nail on the head, that some of this is just helping folks get comfortable with this first statewide model code in Colorado. We haven't had that before. And so you guys being out there helping people understand that, you know, this is still a home rule, local control state. It's just that we had to do something big to get on top of the fire problem in Colorado. And that meant having a statewide standard that would help to mitigate the wildfire problems that we're seeing. And those wildfire problems just aren't limited to the mountains. I think that's a big misconception that when we say wildland fire or the wildland urban interface, we think of the cabin in the woods, but we have destructive wildland fires across the state. And so communicating that to our stakeholders and our communities has been a big deal for you all. So I appreciate that.
One of the things we run into most commonly, I think, is the term WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface, and that tends to be a problematic term when we're talking about the actual risk across the state and areas that may face wildfire. And when people hear Wildland Urban Interface, they're automatically assuming the cabin in the woods, or they're picturing maybe more of an urban area than what we might see on the Eastern Plains as an example. And so working with these communities to reframe that term and make it make sense for what they're actually seeing and the risk that wildfire may pose has been really important for us as we're going out meeting with people.
Really good points. For those of you tuning in, this is Fire Talks with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. I am Chris Brunette with the Fire and Life Safety section. Talking with me today is Aaron Johnson and Kim McDonald from our Professional Development Unit. They are our WUI code educators. They are out in our communities giving great information to anybody who will listen. And we were just talking about kind of the level of comfort with people throughout the state on this code. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that, given that this is new for Colorado to have a statewide minimum code for anything. I know there's been that little bit of discomfort, regardless of where you go in the state. And because of that, there's been some shifting expectations as well as feelings about this. And I know some of that's resulted in recent legislation or legislative attempts. Can you guys talk a little bit about that and what has happened over the past couple of years and the results?
Yeah. What's driving our job was the establishment of the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board as established by Senate Bill 23166 in 2023. And this developed that statewide model code for wildfire resilience. The Governor Polis realized that there was a problem within this state and reached out to the Colorado State Fire Commission, who started, push this to become established. We work hand in hand with the code board, the Resiliency Code Board, and it's their ultimate goal is to make sure that Colorado communities are safer and from wildfires and more resilient to wildfires. So there's 24 members on that board, 21 voting, and then 3 ex officio members. And Chris and I have had this talk in the past. When it first set up, 21 people to come up with a new code, I didn't think it could be done. They did it. So they proved me wrong, which I'm really happy about. But this is an all volunteer board, and there's fire people, building people, architects, insurance, all walks of life from all over the state. A lot of people initially, we've heard that they thought this was a I-25, I-70 code, but it's not. It covers from the plains to the mountains. And this code is specific to Colorado. I don't know if it would work in other states, but for our state, it works well. And they did an exceptionally good job in that 18-month time frame to come up with this code. So I was very impressed with how they did it. And it is the first code. This is the first rendition of it. They realize that, and they're working on things that were missed. But the next code will come out in 28. It's going to be on a 3-year cycle, and I'm just very impressed with what they did in that time frame.
And the feedback that we're getting right now is critical for that next round, the next development of the code, to make sure that we're capturing as much as we can, addressing as many issues as we can to make sure this does work for everyone in the state as best we can.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Aaron. And Kim, thanks for the background on that. I think it's significant to note that the original bill, that Senate Bill 23-166, it set up some pretty tight timelines initially for not only the code board to create the code and make its initial adoption, but then it left very little time for local jurisdictions to make their adoptions. And so I remember in 2025, we had Senate Bill 25-142 that actually made some changes to that and extended the timeframes so that it was a little more comfortable and a little more attainable for local jurisdictions to make their adoptions. And so that did end up passing. It gave local jurisdictions some additional time, which really set those deadlines that we have now of, well, April 1st was when all jurisdictions who have Wildland Urban Interface in their jurisdiction had to adopt this code. And then they need to start enforcing it no later than July 1st of this year. So we're coming down to the wire on these things. But that wasn't without some modifications that occurred under that bill. Now, this year, we saw introduced House Bill 26-1334, and that attempted to make some further modifications to the program. Do you, either of you, have a little more background on that bill and what occurred with it?
Yeah, so that bill, there was a lot of questions about the possibility of extending those timelines. And the goal was to allow for an extension of a year going out to an adoption in 2027 and allowing for more petitions to the code board at a more granular level. And that was reviewed, and ultimately it was shelved indefinitely. So right now it is not moving forward. And we had a lot of jurisdictions that had put their adoption on pause while this was being considered. They wanted to know if there was going to be the opportunity to extend and use as much time as they could. And when that was shelved, we saw a flurry of action of everyone saying, okay, the adoption deadline is an implementation deadline is July 1st of 2026. We need to move forward. And so Kim and I saw an influx of requests and support that needed to go out to make sure that people could make this happen on a little bit faster timeline than what some people had thought that they might be able to achieve.
Yeah, and that probably explains why I see you guys crisscrossing the state here recently and just going out wherever you're needed. So again, I just can't say how grateful I am that you two are here and providing this valuable service to our communities. And talking about providing services to our communities, one other thing that the Senate bill that kicked this all off, Senate Bill 23-166, had in it was that once the implementation of this code came to fruition, DFPC had a obligation to provide enforcement services to jurisdictions who don't have the means or mechanisms to do that themselves. So those jurisdictions have to adopt the code and begin enforcing it. But if they don't have those mechanisms to enforce it, then they're able to request assistance from DFPC. So we're currently in the process of hiring that team up. It took a little while to get the positions as well as the funding for those, but we did finally get that earlier this year, and we're able to hire 5 individuals, which will be a new unit within our building codes branch that will be assisting local jurisdictions with the enforcement of this code. So speaking of that team, and what their work is going to be. Obviously, that's tangential to what you both do. How do you see you working with that team and helping one another out?
I think on that, Chris, we're going to be working hand in hand. Heather Whitaker is going to be is the unit chief. She's bringing in a lot of experience from the building side, and I think she's very enthusiastic on her new role, and I think that's just going to benefit everybody on those issues. You know, we have new rules coming out on July 15th, which will show what the requirements are for the enforcement program. But that whole aspect, we've already met with her and just trying to get the program set up. She's going to start attending some of our presentations just to become more familiar. But I think it's, we have to work hand in hand with them. We've already had, last week we saw our first formal request coming in for assistance. So it's started, and it's just, I think it's going to build from there. Ultimately, Aaron and I have talked about this quite a bit. We'd love to see the jurisdictions run their own enforcement program, because it keeps, they know that they have that knowledge, that local knowledge of how to do it. But if we can, whatever assistance the division can provide, I think it's just going to benefit the state.
And as we develop our enforcement program internally to the DFPC, the timing's actually really great, because it's happening at the same time as everyone across the state is going through this. And there's a lot of opportunities to bounce ideas off of each other, figure out processes that work, and not reinvent the wheel as much as possible, and develop as much as possible these consistent and repeatable processes to assist everyone.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you're listening to Fire Talks with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. This is Chris Brunette. I'm Chief of Fire and Life Safety with the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. And with me today are Aaron Johnson and Kim McDonald, our WUI Code educators. We've been talking about the history of the Wildfire Resiliency Code and their role as it in regards to that code. And now I'd like to get a little bit into maybe what you all are seeing out in the field, because you've been out there since late January, early February, helping out numerous communities. And I'm sure you've had some common questions that get asked, and you probably have your responses down pat. But for anybody listening to this who haven't asked those questions, I'd love to start to cover some of those, just so we have it in this place. And if somebody listening has it, maybe it helps them out. So what are some common questions you're hearing out there, and what are the answers?
I think one of the biggest aspects is the timelines. When the House bill got shelved this year, and there's a lot of jurisdictions having to move forward, now they were worried about where are they going to meet those timelines. Initially, it was to be adopted, the code to be adopted by April 1st of this year, and then 90 days for the enforcement, which took it to July 1st. The code board has their own requirements. Carolyn Larson, who's the administrator for the code board and has done just a great job keeping everybody in line, keeping us moving forward, has to submit at the end of July a list of jurisdictions that have adopted or have not adopted. And then that will be published sometime in October, and it's available to the general public to look at and be able to see who has and who has not. But there was a lot of worry about the repercussions, and there's really no repercussions per se coming out of this act. But it's interesting. We're just not sure who's going to actually look at that list. So I think it's a question, but it's still a very popular question to this day. We did a presentation yesterday up in Frisco, and that same question come up in a continuous basis. So And then for the reporting aspect of this, for the code board will have an affidavit that jurisdictions will have to fill out and to report. It will be published on the code board, the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board website under DFPC. And we're hoping to have that up pretty soon, so jurisdictions can start to submit that they've done it. So.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah. Go ahead, Aaron.
I was going to say another question we get a lot is actually coming from builders and suppliers and contractors who are trying to understand how they can interact with the code and be in compliance. And one of the important things to highlight is the state model code is there for adoption by the jurisdictions, but it is up to every jurisdiction to adopt this code and determine how it's going to be enforced. And Kim mentioned we have well over 600 jurisdictions that are all going through their individualized adoption, where they can have their own amendments, they can have their own maps, and there's going to be a lot of interpretation of the code occurring at that local level. And so one of the challenges we face is when we get these test cases of, well, what about this building design? What about this material? We always have to refer back to the jurisdiction is going to have the ultimate say in whether or not that can be approved. We can just provide guidance with our experience and how it relates to the state model code.
Yeah, and that right there has proven to be a real challenge for us trying to provide enforcement assistance to local jurisdictions, because in Chapter 1 of this code, it establishes the adopting body as the code authority, and they are to establish a code official who is responsible for a number of things, including interpretations of the code. And so with DFPC taking a support role and providing enforcement services only, it's been a challenge to figure out how can we do that with all the jurisdictions who might be asking us for enforcement assistance. And I think we figured that out. As Kim mentioned, the new rules for the enforcement program come out or are official on July 15th, and those outline kind of that process. And if we're working with a local jurisdiction that maybe doesn't have the resources or the knowledge to act as the code official, they can ask us to do that, play that role for them as well. But when we do that, we're doing it for that jurisdiction and under their adoption. And so it's been an interesting path to travel, but I think we've figured it out, and I'm looking forward to Heather and her team providing those services. And no doubt it's going to be dynamic as we figure out how to navigate this as the state's first statewide model code. So,
and that's a good point, Chris. That's, trying to work with it. We've had to explain to people part of within our roles when we're out teaching, we can assist the jurisdiction in setting up an enforcement program, but Aaron and I, as part of that grant, are not allowed to do enforcement. So we've had to explain that to people that, but we will work with them to set up their complete programs. But it comes back, if they're asking for assistance from DFPC, it's going to be the Heather and her team that will have to do that.
Yeah, but I like what you said earlier, Kim, about really our overarching goal is to not indefinitely provide enforcement services for these jurisdictions. I mean, there might be some that that's the only option, and we might continue to provide those services indefinitely. But really, I like what you said about, we want to provide those services initially, but you and Aaron are there to help them eventually transition to a point where they can provide those services themselves, because they are that community's department. They know their communities, they understand their communities, and their communities are best served by somebody within the community. So I like how you said that. But can you both elaborate a little bit more on your role in assisting with setting up those programs?
Yeah, within that, I mentioned earlier, we have the different phases. Phase one was initially setting up, helping people to adopt, but now we've moved into phase two. So now we will work with the jurisdiction, whether it's building, fire, the counties, whoever wants us to help them in setting up how to do their permits, how to set fees, and then actually training. One of the things we're working on that's coming up is actually be able to do classes for the different jurisdictions on how to do the inspections, be able to teach them, work with them, I guess is a better way to explain it, to set up a program that can be successful for both them and their community, their citizens within that community, to understand what the requirements are.
And one of the incredible things we've seen time after time is as we meet with these jurisdictions and really explain the contents of the code and what the enforcement will entail, we've seen a shift from going, oh, we are automatically going to request the assistance of the DFPC to, oh, this isn't as complicated as what we thought it was. We're already providing most of this. We're already looking at most of this. We just haven't seen it as a whole package. And seeing people's eyes light up as they come to that realization has been really exciting.
I love hearing that. That's so good. Well, I kind of want to transition to this map. You both have touched on the map, the statewide map. We haven't talked a lot about it, but I know people have questions about it. What kind of questions are you hearing in regards to the map? I know it's the elephant in the room, but I think it's good that we talk a little bit about it here. So
yeah, when it comes to the map, so one of the things that the code board was tasked with is defining the Wildland Urban Interface, and it is a problematic term, like we said. The broad definition being, where man-made infrastructure meets hazardous vegetative fuels, and depending on how you look at it, that can encompass so many different things. And depending on the organization, the background, everyone has a different way of defining what the WUI is, be it a fire protection district, an insurance company where they're using actuarial tables and looking at their portfolio to determine that risk. And so ultimately, as the code board was going through this process, they wanted to use data that was out there that was backed by a rigorous scientific process. And they referred back to the Colorado State Forest Service CORA report from 2022. That's the Colorado Wildfire Risk Analysis. And within that data set that you can view through the Colorado State Forest Atlas, one of the layers that they found to be most useful was the fire intensity classification. And this looks at fuel type, fuel density, topography, and incorporates in critical fire weather to determine how intense a fire would be in an area. Now, this data was collected over many years in the lead up to 2022, and it was collected using the best data sensing tools that we had at the time, but it may not be absolutely 100% correct for current conditions in areas, or the data may have been wrong from the start. There's a lot of factors that go into influencing how that map actually came to be. But one of the great things is that the code board made sure to include a process where jurisdictions can petition for a variance to make sure that the local map that gets adopted is accurate for those conditions. And so we've been getting a ton of questions from people about how they can update that map, how they can petition the code board to make sure it's accurate and that the risk is being presented correctly. So trying to work with jurisdictions to make sure they understand the process for how the state map was created and how they can go about petitioning and what information that the code board is looking for in that petition process. I think one of the things I've noted most, though, is a lot of people may have been underestimating their risk in certain areas. So as we've talked to some areas that want to adopt a local map, and we talk about the information that they might need to provide, and we start looking at the information that they have, maybe it's included in their CWPP or a different organization's provided risk maps to them. Oftentimes we find that those risk maps actually show the same thing that the state map is showing. And at a certain point, you start to go, okay, maybe the issue isn't that the maps are wrong, maybe our understanding of the risk is wrong.
Wow. Wow. That's insightful. I hadn't heard that yet, Aaron, and so thank you for sharing that. That's good to know, and I like hearing that. But regardless, I recognize that a map that we've created for the entire state is going to have some areas where maybe it's not as accurate as the local jurisdiction would like, and I'm glad they have that petition process. Is that their only mechanism for making modifications to the map?
No, there's also a ground truthing process that is out there where an owner or builder can request a modification during the permit application process and have a report created by a qualified wildfire professional. And every jurisdiction gets to determine who is a qualified wildfire professional. Kim and I are available to help provide guidance on that, but ultimately they get to determine who they will accept those reports from. And those ground truthing reports, they're going to be created using the same information that was used to create the state map. So looking at those fuel types, the density, the topography, fire weather, including fire modeling if it's available. And it's there to make sure that if conditions are inaccurately reflected on that local map, that there is a process to get that updated for what is currently out there.
Yeah. And the biggest thing about on that side of it too, it's staying local. This is not being submitted to the code board for review or anything. The ground truthing aspect will stay to the local jurisdiction. So it makes a big difference. But for anybody that's curious about how further petitions, once again, going to the DFPC website and then going to the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. And there's actually a petitions for code variations and mapping on that website, which will walk people through what the requirements are for if they want to go to a petition or they want to do a locally developed map. So there's templates available on it for how to do it. So please, if anybody has those questions, and just go onto the website. There's some great resources on that site. So just to put that plug in.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that, Kim. And so we've been talking about the common questions you get. Let's talk about common experiences. Do you guys have any common experiences you've been having that you haven't already shared that you'd like to share?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
No, Kim, you go first.
I was going to say, like, we've covered the state, and it's been really interesting. We did one of our first presentations was out in Stratton, out on the plains, and they had some great questions, and but they actually pushed through. Kit Carson County pushed through their adoption after we got done, because I think we were able to take away a lot of their fears and the misconceptions. So just working with them was, it worked out really well. We've worked there. We've, been up in the mountains, seeing how it works for them. Just the feedback we get from these different agencies after we get done with our presentations has really been you know, it's been a challenge to do some of the presentations, but it's really awesome and interesting to hear how it works for a jurisdiction after we get done. So that's been, you know, it's really made us feel good on that.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think something that we've seen quite a bit of is when we attend public hearings, be it county commissioners or the town board, or even if the fire protection district opens that up for public comment, the amount of misinformation and misunderstanding about the code is substantial. And it's very easy for local voices and local resistance to show up and provide anecdotal stories that do not accurately reflect what we're seeing in the research and the science. An example is, you know, we've seen people coming out and saying that they estimate that the building costs for building to the code will be 25 to 50% more than what it currently costs to build a home. And that's not what we see. We actually have, you know, a research report that shows that the costs are nominal and usually in the range of maybe 2 to 3% increase. And we're actually getting ready to hear the results of a report specific to the Colorado Code. So we're really excited to get that information in there.
That's really good to know, Aaron, and thank you for sharing that. I think, you know, we're looking forward to having that information and knowing exactly what it's going to cost our residents to build to this code. But I hope everybody just keeps in mind that this is really related to not only life safety but community safety, and you know, it might cost a little bit more, but on the back end, having the knowledge and the comfort to know that our homes and our communities are safer, I hope that will make it well worth it. And that's not to mention the accessibility and affordability of insurance. As we continue down the road of having more destructive fires in Colorado and across the country, I think it's going to be harder to get insurance and maintain insurance, especially affordable insurance. And so doing something like this, where we are reducing those risks from wildland fire, should on the back end help with being able to get insurance and get affordable insurance. And so I hope people keep that in mind as well. Sorry, a little bit of a soapbox, but I think it's always important to look at that aspect. So
it is, Chris. I think that's such a good point. But, you know, one of the things Aaron and I talk about is also the social economic aspect. You know, we like our communities. We like where we live, as does, you know, people move into their neighborhoods. But we have a wildfire move through, you know, the majority of people will never come back. They may never, you know, they may rebuild there, they may not rebuild there. But during that time frame, the damage done to the water systems, their, you know, the stores, just people where they live. You know, you lose your babysitter because they had to move away because they lost their home. So we try and explain that, bring that into fact with when we're doing our presentations, because it's just not the code. We're also, you know, we hear a lot of that. We have to remove every tree in their yard or their community, and it's just not the truth. It's so it's just taking, as Aaron mentioned, that misinformation aspect and just trying to show them the truth of that the code is actually beneficial to them in a lot of times, because it makes the forest more healthy, as you know, doing some of this mitigation and stuff. So that's been the fun of it.
Yes, and there's been a ton of fun in what Kim and I get to do. I think we've been afforded a very unique opportunity to interact with the state in a very intimate manner, and we're seeing barriers come down between organizations at a really rapid pace, unlike anything I've seen in my professional wildfire experience. There's so many more conversations that are occurring and people who are coming to the table with unique experiences that are building out ways to support their communities that are really unique. And I think one of the most exciting things we've seen is just the number of people that are on board with this and excited to see how they can support wildfire mitigation and protect their communities, and the people that want to do the right thing. And it's been an incredible opportunity to go out and do this. And Kim and I are pretty lucky. We know that.
Well, but I need to say that we're pretty lucky, not only as an organization, but as a state. I think all of our communities have benefited from the work that you both are doing, and I can't thank you enough. It's amazing to see, and just keep up the good work. I think with that, we're going to leave it at that. So this has been Fire Talks. I've been talking with Aaron Johnson and Kim McDonald, our two WUI code educators within the Professional Development Unit here at the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. Thank you both so much for joining me. Thanks for all the information. We talked a lot about the misinformation that's out there. And I think this podcast will go a long way in getting the right information out there. And again, is just a tribute to everything you guys are doing. So thank you again. Thanks for joining us, and everybody have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.